Hey everybody, it's Alex, and if you're watching today, you might be wondering, is AI woke or racist? The answer? Both. It really depends what kind of AI model we're using, where we're getting the data from, and a lot of nuance. So if you want to find out more about that, just watch. If not, just log off. So today we'll just be looking at large language models because they're the AI when people think of more nowadays. It's the one that's taking the public discourse. So what is a large language model? So imagine if you took all these words, all these dictionaries, all this sentence structure you find in books, magazines, and compile it into one language, into one model that understands this language, and then can process it. That's essentially what a large language model does. All it does is compile a bunch of information, understands the structure of that information, and uses that to build the model. But where this data is sourced for is completely different and can really add in some biases we see a lot in these AI models. On the racism side, a lot of these AI models take their information from the internet, places like Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, so on and so forth. Whoever has the most frequent voice, not the loudest, the most frequent voice on those systems, is the one that's going to be ingested more frequently into those large language models. So in aggregate, yes, it takes in all of these right-wing, racist undertones and ideas from the internet. But what about on the woke side? On this other side, we have woke or leftism or whatever you like to call it. And so what happens? You have the same biases, right? Again, we have the people who post most frequently and not the loudest voice on one side. And whatever they say, whether they say Trump is a terrible person, whether they say conservatism is going to be the downfall of the United States, Reagan was a bad president, all that information is taken into these large language models. So what do we do to balance out really extreme left views like wokeism and extremely right views like alt-right and fringe groups like that? So that's when a second process is applied to these models to basically correct that. And that's determined by the modelers. And that's when things get a little more hazy, right? Because who's to say one modeler can't say, oh, I want this model to be more First Amendment friendly in a sense, and spew out whatever the model thinks is the best answer. So they're going to go with an unfettered AI model that has no restrictions. So it could go on both extremes. However, if there's a modeler that's like, oh, I noticed that if a modeler or a developer decides I'd rather have an AI model that focuses more on less racist tones, left alt-right ideas, then it'll try to bring it back into the middle. But the issue with that is that if it goes too far, then you end up being left and it keeps being pushed that way. Especially since a lot of these models are self-taught. Self-trained is the term we use in the AI world, meaning that for each additional time the model developer reinforces the notion that it should not go for those alt-right fringe ideas, it keeps pushing it a little more to the left and so on and so forth until eventually, it gets there, and instead of having a really neutral platform and a really neutral model, you have a very far left model. The same thing happens in the other way. Let's say we have an unfettered model and it decides to be trained on more easily accessed and available resources, places like Twitter, that is notoriously known for really interesting content. And in that case, it keeps being pushed more to the right, reinforcing itself. So in a sense, is AI racist? Kind of. Is it woke? Kind of. Is it somewhere in the middle? Not really. It's kind of all over the place. Kind of like how humans are. And I think that's what makes us human. We don't have one idea of what's right or wrong. We have multiple ideas of what's right and wrong, depending on where we grew up. Our culture, our language, our family, our friends, our community, our religious systems, our schooling, our education, our workplace. All that culminates into what I consider our human intelligence. So what can we do about it? So first off, understand what your model's doing and why the developers and modelers decided to train a model like that. For example, something like ChatGPT doesn't talk about politics. If you remember, the cutoff date for ChatGPT is 2023, so that's why if you go on, ask about Kamala Harris and her potential to be a presidential candidate, that's why you see ChatGPT be more in favor of that over someone like former and president-elect Donald Trump. And so what about science? For example, a lot of people on this alt-right conservative group decide that vaccinations aren't the best for me, vaccines cause autism. And then on this other side, it's like everyone should be vaccinated, no exceptions, with the minor except maybe like medical reasons, but religious reasons shouldn't be a reason for why you should be exempt from taking a vaccination. So how does AI meet in the middle? And that's when AI has other mechanisms to try to no longer find out what voice is most frequent, but what voice is more authoritative. And then again, that's a modeler's decision. Who says it's more authoritative? Why should someone at the CDC or National Institutes of Health be more prominent or more influential voice than someone on Twitter, or someone on Reddit, someone on Instagram, or just someone on Facebook? Hopefully we don't need to have a debate about that, but I feel like sometimes we do. And the last thing to keep in mind when you're picking a model and deciding to use a model is that all models are built differently. Some are built to be smaller and more portable. Some are built to be large and take a lot of computational power. And that's the issue, is that right now a lot of these models are kind of all over the place. The big players, ChatGPT, Microsoft's Copilot, and Google Gemini, all have the same foundations, but they have different techniques and ways of doing it that make them more like us, that try to make them more human, more diverse of thought. But at the end, you're probably going to get the same response, regardless of which platform you use.